2026 has been an incredible year for horror, and as a horror fan myself, it genuinely makes me happy to see the genre enjoying such widespread success. One film in particular that has completely exploded in the mainstream is Obsession, a story about a man who uses a supposedly wish granting toy to make the girl he loves fall in love with him, only for that wish to spiral into a nightmare. You know, your classic monkey's paw, be careful what you wish for kind of story. But beneath its supernatural horror lies something far more disturbing. Welcome everyone, this is The Milestoner, and today I want to take a deep dive into Obsession and discuss some of the deeper aspects of the film. Now, this was a film that I had been eagerly looking forward to ever since the first trailer dropped, and suffice to say, it completely lived up to the hype. In fact, it has become one of my favorite films of 2026. This isn't just a horror movie that simply relies on jump scares or gore. It's a deeply psychological and thematic story packed with so many details that only become apparent once you've seen the entire film and revisited it with a completely different perspective. And to think that this was a film by a first time director who previously used to be a YouTuber. Insane! Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the story, the film follows Bear, an awkward, insecure guy who is in love with his best friend Nikki but cannot muster up the courage to tell her. So he buys a one wish willow from a crystal shop and wishes for Nikki to love him more than anyone else in the world. The wish immediately takes effect, Nikki becomes obsessed with Bear, horrifyingly so, and it all ends in tragedy. At first, the film presents Bear as an innocent, down on his luck guy. So when he makes the wish, it doesn't really feel wrong. I mean, let's be honest, we have all looked at a shooting star or made a wish at 11:11, hoping that the person we like would like us back. It's a harmless fantasy, and Bear himself does not believe that the wish is real. So, when Nikki suddenly starts behaving strangely, he is just as shocked as we are. The first indication that something is seriously wrong comes when Nikki unexpectedly kisses Bear, only to immediately pull away in confusion, terrified by her own actions. She even says that she saw something strange. From that point onwards, it becomes increasingly clear that Nikki isn't acting of her own free will. Something else has taken control of her as a consequence of the wish. And for the sake of this discussion, let's just call this version of her Freaky Nikki.
I'm your freaky Nikki.
Ew, don't call me that.
Freaky Nikki slowly becomes more and more unhinged in her behavior and devotion towards Bear, ultimately killing their other friends in the climax, and Nikki is eventually freed from the wish when Bear overdoses on pills and dies in her arms. Simple enough, right? Nope, not even close. And that's what makes Obsession so fascinating, because despite what the film initially wants us to believe, the true villain of the story isn't Freaky Nikki, it's Bear himself. We get an indication of this right after the scene in the restaurant where Bear realizes his wish has come true and is what is causing Nikki to be so devoted to him. At that moment, he knows that she isn't acting of her own free will. He knows that she no longer has control over her own body and mind, and yet, in the very next scene, he sleeps with her. To me, this is the most disturbing scene in the entire film. We see Nikki in bed, expressionless, almost in a trance. The moans she is making sound inhuman. This is not Nikki, rather something else trying its best to sound human and please Bear. And this scene completely flips everything on its head because we realize that Nikki is the poor victim here. She has no control over her body or thoughts. And Bear, who knows that his wish is making her obsess over him, has no care about it. The most important scene of the film. So obviously the Indian censor board cut this scene out in the theatrical release. Way to go, censor board! But coming to the film, this is the moment where the audience is forced to completely re-evaluate Bear's character. And from this point on, things only get worse. Freaky Nikki stands quietly in the corner of Bear's room while he sleeps, cuts off his hair, tapes his front door shut so he can't leave, and even serves him a sandwich made from his dead cat Sandy. The first time I watched the film, I was completely confused by the cat sandwich. It just felt bizarre for the sake of being bizarre. But on a rewatch, it actually makes horrifying sense. Freaky Nikki knows Bear was sad about Sandy's death. In her twisted, wish-created mind, she is just trying to comfort him. She isn't trying to hurt him. She genuinely believes she is giving him exactly what he wants. She cooked him a meal, and at the same time, she returned his beloved cat. It's an act of love that's been grotesquely distorted by the curse. This finally pushes Bear into calling the One Wish Willow helpline to undo the wish. Or, well, not exactly. He wants to alter the wish. Even after everything that's happened so far, he still isn't willing to let Nikki go. In a terrifying scene, we hear the mysterious One Wish Willow helpline operator tell Bear that the only way for Nikki to go back to being normal is his death, before making him listen to the agonizing screams of who we can only assume is the real Nikki. Bear is also terrified at this. At this point, he believes his only options are either to live with Freaky Nikki the way she is or kill himself. So he does nothing. And that's interesting because much later in the film, he rushes back to the crystal shop and buys more One Wish willows to try changing his wish, which obviously raises a very important question. Why didn't he think of doing that here? Maybe he wanted to exhaust every other possibility before sacrificing himself? Maybe he was still desperately hoping he could somehow keep Nikki while fixing the situation? Either way, one thing is clear. Even after learning the horrific consequences of his wish, Bear's first instinct still isn't to save Nikki. It's to save himself. Well, all he wants to do right now is go to a boys' night with Ian. And yes, I forgot to mention that throughout the film, rather than telling his friends the truth about the wish, he lets everyone believe that Nikki is either losing her mind or abusing drugs. He's more than happy to let her reputation be destroyed if it means he doesn't have to face the consequences of what he did. Because that's who Bear is. He doesn't actually care what Nikki wants, he just wants Nikki to be with him, whether she has a choice in the matter or not. And nowhere is that clear than during the party sequence. Honestly, the entire party is one of the most terrifying sequences in the film. From Freaky Nikki reading that bizarre Hansel and Gretel incest story to the horrifying sequence with Sarah. Seriously, Bear, why would you read that there knowing exactly what was going to happen?
Kiss the person on your left.
To the real Nikki briefly breaking free of the trance and desperately trying to kill herself just to escape the entity controlling her. And Bear is obviously just sitting there watching all this go down without doing anything. But it is a conversation immediately after the party that I think is another one of the most important scenes in the entire film. Because this is where we finally understand why the wish went so horribly wrong. Bear doesn't actually love Nikki. He loves the version of Nikki that exists inside his own head. Think about it. Throughout the film, Bear constantly begs Freaky Nikki to be like the real Nikki. But the irony is that neither of them can ever be the Nikki he wants. The real Nikki is her own person with her own thoughts, feelings and choices. Freaky Nikki is an obsessive supernatural manifestation of Bear's wish. And the Nikki that Bear truly wants, she doesn't exist. She's an idealized fantasy that Bear has created in his own mind. A version of Nikki who exists solely to love him, understand him and make him happy. That's why the wish was doomed from the very beginning. You can't magically force a real person to become the version you have imagined in your head. And I think that's what Obsession is really about. It's not simply a cautionary tale about being careful what you wish for. It's about the danger of falling in love with your idea of someone instead of accepting who they really are. The film makes Bear's selfishness even more explicit in the very next scene. Sarah texts him asking him to meet up and he leaves after seeing everything that has happened so far. And while leaving, he hears the real Nikki break out and request him to kill her. She begs for him to free her of her torment, only for him to ask,
What's so bad about being with me?
Yeah, no Bear, there's no defending you in any way after this. You are a horrible person. Bear meets Sarah. They talk about how Ian and Nikki had been hooking up in the past, which again makes me really pissed off at Ian. You know your best friend likes the girl you've been hooking up with, and you are purposely giving him bad advice to sabotage his chances? And then you have Sarah. She knew about Ian and Nikki the entire time, but she never told Bear because she had feelings for him herself. If you pay attention throughout the film, she's constantly trying to get closer to him, even after Bear and Nikki get together. The clearest example is in the car when she tells Bear that she was sitting next to Bear at the party. And I feel if Freaky Nikki hadn't shown up and murdered her, they probably would have kissed. Honestly, the whole friend group is kind of a mess. But despite all of that, I'd still argue Nikki is the most innocent person in the entire group. There are plenty of hints throughout the film that she may have liked Bear, or at least knew he had feelings for her. Curry Barker, the film's director, and Inde Navarrete, the actress who plays Nikki, have both hinted as much in interviews, which admittedly makes her relationship with Ian a little messy because there are moments when she does unintentionally lead Bear on. But, none of that justifies what happened to her. And I love that the screenplay refuses to give us a definitive answer. We never found out whether Nikki would have truly given Bear a chance. In fact, Curry Barker revealed that he filmed two different versions of Nikki's conversation with Bear in the car. One where she delivers her lines as if she's interested in him, and one where she isn't. He then edited the two performances together, deliberately keeping her true feelings ambiguous from the audience. Whether Nikki would have ever loved Bear is left entirely to our interpretation. But returning to the film, it isn't until Sarah is murdered that Bear finally decides to use another one wish willow to undo his mistake. Unfortunately, he can't make another wish himself, so he turns to Ian for help. But once again, proving that he is a terrible friend, Ian instead asks for $1 billion, leaving Bear exactly where he started off. When Bear returns home, things reach their breaking point. In one final attempt to make Bear love her, Freaky Nikki has made herself look exactly like Sarah, before holding him at gunpoint and demanding that he tells her he loves her. When Ian barges into the house, she shoots him as well. For the first time in the entire film, Bear accepts that the only way to end the nightmare is for him to die. Or at least that's what he tells himself. This is another detail I only caught on my second viewing. Even here, Bear is still trying to find a way out. He isn't looking for a guaranteed death, but looking for a way to die and hopefully be brought back afterwards. He eventually settles on overdosing on pills, but even then he chickens out and almost throws them up, only for Nikki to use the one wish willow to make a wish at that exact moment, putting Bear in a trance. The film never tells us what that wish was, or even whether it was made by the real Nikki or Freaky Nikki. But whatever she wished for, it finally allows Bear to love Freaky Nikki the way she always wanted. Just moments before the overdose kills him and breaks the curse. The real Nikki is finally free, but she's left surrounded by the bodies of her closest friends, traumatized by everything she's been forced to do, and likely facing a lifetime of guilt, PTSD, and maybe even prison, considering everyone at the party witnessed her behavior. The last scene of the film, of Nikki agonizingly screaming at the carnage around her, is just heartbreaking. Every single tragedy in this film can ultimately be traced back to one decision: Bear's. I can forgive the wish itself. From Bear's perspective, it was just a harmless wish. He never expected it to come true, let alone turn into something so horrifying. But once he learns the truth, once he realizes Nikki has completely lost control over herself, every decision he makes afterwards is entirely his own fault. And that is what cements him as the true villain of the story. And well, the film quietly hints at this from the very beginning. Think back to the opening few minutes of the film. Bear comes home to find his cat Sandy dead after overdosing on his grandmother's medication. But how does that even happen? How does a cat get into pills that were supposed to be locked in a cabinet? Instead, they're left carelessly lying around where a cat can mistake them for food. It is a subtle detail, but it immediately tells us something about Bear. He's careless, he's apathetic, his negligence has consequences. And what more, instead of properly burying the cat like any cat lover would do, he simply throws Sandy into the trash. Sure, he mourns Sandy's death right after that, but he still goes to a party when Nikki calls him. Sandy's death has no long-lasting effect on him, except for gaining sympathy from others. Looking back, the film was showing us who Bear really was from the beginning. Just like Nikki, we only saw the version of himself that Bear wanted everyone else to see. And I think that's the true horror of obsession. It's not the curse, it's not the possession, it's the realization that sometimes the real monster isn't the supernatural entity. It's the ordinary person standing right beside you, the kind of person you don't recognize for who they truly are until it's far too late. And that's really what makes Obsession one of my favorite horror films of the year. The more I think about it, the more details I discover. And I think that speaks volumes about Curry Barker's screenplay. There are dozens of fan theories surrounding the film, including the popular one that Freaky Nikki is actually Sandy's spirit. I personally don't buy into that one. Still, I absolutely love that the film leaves enough unanswered questions for so many different interpretations to exist. But that's just my reading of the film. I'd love to hear yours. If you think I missed something, or if you have your own interpretation of Obsession, let me know in the comments below. I genuinely love to read what you guys think. Also, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more such content, do like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.